A lot of people say this is their very favorite coral, but it can be hard to keep in captivity because of a mysterious disease. Hi everybody, John here with another FinCast. Today we're talking about elegance corals. This is a beautiful coral. In fact, I have one in my aquarium. But people have had a hard time keeping historically elegance corals alive. Well, the collectors are doing a better job, and if you know what to look for, this is a coral that you can keep relatively easily in your aquarium. It's a standard sort of LPS coral. So if you've had hammer corals or torch corals, anything in the what they call the Euphyllia family, this is a coral you probably want to look at. And I'm here with Chris Klein, and Chris is an expert on it. He's a wholesaler, and he brings a lot of these in and moves a lot of them through his business. And I asked him to show us how to know to buy a good one and what to look for and how to take care of these corals once you have them in your aquarium.
It is an LPS. It's very pretty. It's open. It's flowing. It's very similar to some of the Euphyllias that are out there that move. And these guys are slower growing. They will sting other corals. They open up. They have tentacles all over them, so they do need to be kept away from other corals right around them. But they're very beautiful. They have some amazing colors. A lot of different color combinations, different tips. You have pink, red, blue tips even. So it's definitely a really nice coral.
I want to interrupt my interview with Chris for just a moment. I'm back in my home studio right now, continuing to talk about the elegance coral. But one of the things I realized as I started to interview Chris is that I didn't give a good explanation while I was there in the warehouse about some of the background and why the elegance coral is so important to talk about. Not the least of which is its popularity. A number of very experienced aquarists, if you read around online, will tell you that it is their favorite coral, or certainly in their top 5 favorite corals. I'd say it's certainly one of my top 5 favorite corals. But it's been a very difficult coral to maintain in captivity because of an unknown syndrome that has attacked this coral. So you buy what looks like a healthy specimen, you bring it home, and then it doesn't do well. And so that's part of something called ECS, or elegance coral syndrome, and I'll give you a little bit of background on that. Back in 2008, when I owned the local reef shop, we would import these elegance corals. We would buy them from wholesalers, and they would come in and they would look extremely healthy, and they'd be in an aquarium with other Euphyllia, your frog spawns, and your torch corals, and some other corals that would all do very well. But the elegance coral didn't do well. They would shrink back, and a lot of them would die. Now some of the customers would buy them and have great success, and so I would say that about 25% of ours, if we kept them long enough where I could actually track them, did extremely well, and then maybe another 25% were and probably 50% would die. And at the time, as it turned out, that wasn't that uncommon, and it was all because of this elegance coral syndrome, or ECS, and it was written about by a guy named Eric Bornman, and I'll link to his article in the description with this video. But it became a huge problem because everybody wants this coral because it's so beautiful. In fact, this is the one that's in my aquarium right now, and you can see the beautiful tips on it, and I'll show you some close-ups of it on the video as well. But Chris gave me an elegance coral, an Australian coral, and I put it in my aquarium, and it's doing extremely well. But I wanted to wait a few months to make sure that I wasn't still having this problem, and it's doing very, very well in my aquarium. And if you look around the rest of my tank, you'll see that this is a tank where the LPS, the large polyp stony corals, actually thrive. I've got a couple of huge colonies of frog spawn. I've got another smaller but beautiful frog spawn with bright green tips. A hammer coral is doing very well. A bubble coral, which is absolutely one of my favorites, on the bottom of my tank and doing extremely well. And if you look, you'll see the tentacle extension on one side, and that's because it's doing warfare with the mushrooms that are trying to encroach on it, and that bubble coral is having none of it. So they've reached sort of a standoff. The mushrooms aren't encroaching, and the bubble coral keeps those tentacles extended on that side. And that's the only place I typically see it, except the tentacles except when I feed it. So anyway, they're doing pretty well. Well, one of the things that we have learned in recent times is that it's becoming easier and easier to keep these elegance corals. In fact, the Australian corals are doing quite well now. The Indonesian corals, which I will tell you that I think are more beautiful than the Aussies, and mine's an Aussie, don't do as well. I still think that there's some of that ECS out there with these Indonesian elegance corals, but the Indonesians come in much prettier colors. They've got longer, prettier tentacles typically, and Chris only had green and green in his shop, and we'll see those in just a moment. But oftentimes when you go there, he's got some that it's really hard to restrain yourself from buying, or we have a maintenance company, and sometimes we'll buy and we'll place in our clients' tanks. But we've been staying away from the Indonesians so far. Even nothing wrong with Chris's, but just because their reputation isn't quite as good. And Chris will address perhaps some of the reasons behind that in just a moment, and he'll actually show you how to pick up or have a store employee pick up a coral and look at it and see if it is one that has the potential to survive or one that maybe wouldn't do so well in your aquarium. So at any rate, look in the description, and then at the end of this video I also want to let you know that I've got some beautiful video of my own elegance coral, and I'll be showing that, and while that's up on the screen I'll put some text up that gives you all the information on the best lighting, best placement in the tank, how to feed the coral, all the different things, lighting, that will make you have success with the coral. So let's go back now to the interview with Chris, and we'll get the rest of the lowdown on the Australian and the Indonesian elegance corals.
To be honest with you, I think the Indonesians are even nicer as far as color combinations. With these here, the cone bottom elegance, the majority of them are green. They do have color tips. We have some pink tips and blue tips that come in with those. These are the only Indonesian elegances we have in right now. They're not indicative of what normally comes out of Indonesia. I guess you would say these are almost leftovers. Normally we have a whole row of them, and there'll be quite a few pieces that are just amazing. But I know the collection practices and procedures have improved dramatically from years and years ago. There's better facilities, there are better holding, shipping facilities. The time transit has been cut down. With Australia, their elegance for some reason are way, way better. They have a lot more technology and ability than some of the Indonesian areas do, so I think that has a lot to do with it. Even now, the Indonesian ones seem to be doing better than they ever have. So that's I think substations in different little islands that they're collecting these corals, they have better ability to hold them.
Chris, one of the keys to getting a successful elegance coral is finding one that's healthy in the store. And I know you look at a lot of these. How do you know if you got a good one?
Well, typically what I'll do is I'll actually touch my finger to the actual tentacles of the elegance, and if they stick to you kind of like an anemone like this one's doing, that's a good sign. That means it's healthy, it's ready to feed. Obviously you shouldn't go putting your hands in the store's tanks, but you might be able to get your sales associate to do that for you. Also, what I like to do is pick up the elegance, look around where the tissue hits the skeleton, make sure there's no recession, there's no gaps, no white film of any sort, just to make sure it's not on its way out. This one was fully open when we started. It did stick to my finger, and the tissue skeleton, the conjunction there is perfect all the way around. So this would be an extremely healthy elegance.
Do you suggest feeding the elegance corals?
They will need some sort of food. I mean, they are photosynthetic, obviously, but we don't typically feed them here because we don't hold them for very long. We'll have them typically a week to 2 weeks, and they're out to the store. As far as in the actual store, depending on how long the actual coral is there, it is definitely feedable. It would be recommended. We just don't here because we don't want to feed him one day and then ship him out, and he produces waste in the bag and makes it tougher to get to the destination. So,
but for the end user, feeding an elegance coral is probably a good idea.
Absolutely, absolutely. This is something that it's definitely going to help it grow. It's going to be naturally where it is in the wild. It's going to be picking up different types of plankton and food as it's sitting there on the reef. So it's definitely recommended there.